Ambedkarism, Marxism, liberalism, Dravidianism, feminism, Gandhiism. What role are these great big isms of the 20th century playing in the 21st century? What relevance do they have today?
I have a dream.
I'm an atheist in the same way as I'm an a-leprechaun.
Why have there been casteism existing in the country still today?
Feminism, by definition, is the belief that men and women should have equal
The
rights.
nature of the system is to be as mean and rotten as you can, to try to maximize profit.
I'm Sudipto Mondal, and welcome to this episode of What's Your Ism? Like you, I would wish for a better world in 25, but I'm going to be realistic. I'm going to hope that this year is full of new ideas and fresh discoveries for you and for me. And I hope, for the sake of journalism, for the sake of my colleagues, that as this subscription model of ours, which we are working on, as it grows, by the end of 25, I hope we get paid our due. But now that we speaking of isms, those of you who watched my episode with Dhanya might have picked up on how my journalism was very greatly impacted by not just feminists but feminist journalists, and particularly when it comes to writing about caste, which I try to do a lot in the last 10 years. One of the things that helped me a lot is to look at the frames that feminist journalists in India and a little bit in the US, the kind of frames they employed. It helped me a lot in my journalism. So today, I have someone here in this show who contributed a great deal to my journalism while I was learning the ropes in Bangalore. Ammu Joseph, thank you so much for coming on What's Your Ism. I've been wanting to have you since this show started, and I'm so glad you've made it in the beginning of this new year. Thank you, Ammu.
Yeah, this is a big thing for me because, as I told you, I don't like to be on camera.
I didn't either. But it's one of those things with the times, I suppose. We are both print people. Ammu, so I struggled to put this interview together for two reasons. One, because I know you so well. It's always difficult to interview somebody you know. But also because your work is like an elephant. It's it's so large, it's so vast, so varied. And it starts in the 70s and it's still on and going strong. You've covered issues ranging from, human rights, caste, gender, because a lot of people think of you as this person who's the co-founder of NWMI, the network of women in media, and they think of Ammu Joseph, the feminist journalist. But somebody like me who's followed your work for so many years knows that there are so many dimensions to your work, and perhaps just calling you a feminist journalist is diminishing, I would say. You were with the UNESCO. You drafted the UNESCO policy on
Gender sensitivity media.
In media, exactly. I first encountered you in, I think, 2008-9, and in, I think, around 2010-11, you were with you're putting the Women in Media report together within 2010-15.
Yeah, probably.
Let me look. I have it in my notes
now.
Here somewhere. This is the global report on women. The global report on women.
The one on women in journalism all over the world, right? I coordinated the India report. Yeah.
Right. I'm going to rattle through some of these things. So, her work, of course, has appeared in multiple publications. This global media monitoring project is one of, I think, one of the things that introduced me to her work. Then, of course, you were the South Asia coordinator for this entire exercise, and you worked with countries.
No, I think the South Asia coordinator thing was for the International Women's Media Foundation had commissioned a study on women working in the media.
Right.
So that was a different one, and that's what I think I coordinated for South Asia. GMMP, I coordinated India in the first, 2010, and then 2015. And then 2020, I handed over the responsibility to someone else who was actually more equipped. I'm not a trained researcher. I've sort of stumbled into research as part of my work. And so, but there are people who are actually trained researchers. And in 2020, Padmaja Shaw from the University of Osmania University, took over the GMMP responsibility for the network.
Right. So, like I said, I'm going to pick on parts of that elephant. I think I'm going to go for the tusk and the the trunk first. Okay, the really, the one thing that okay, let me tell you first what I'm going to talk about. So, definitely, there's this entire journey of, your time in India as a journalist and all of that. There's NWMI, and there's this one very special segment, and that segment actually came to me late. So, I've kind of rearranged the entire interview because one thing I didn't know about you, I know a lot about you. One thing I didn't know that you wrote a children's column in Young World, The Hindu, and you ran it for 8 years. And it's my loss that I didn't know about this. And I started reading these columns these pieces that you
wrote. You were probably a child at that time, no?
1990 to 1996, no?
98.
98, yeah. Child, no? High school? I would have been a decent audience for, I could have benefited from that writing. So that's one segment I hope you'll find very interesting, as I'm very invested in that conversation. But to start things off, let's go chronologically. Okay, your story starts when you first land in India, having done your schooling in different parts of the world. You land in India, you go in for a bachelor's program at the Madras Christian College.
Women's Christian College.
Women's Christian College.
The sister college of Madras Christian College.
So my first simple question, what was India looking like back then? We're talking about
1970.
1970
to 74, I did my undergraduate,
So what were your first impressions? Just a easy, simple question.
First of all, it was really my decision to come back to India for my undergraduate studies, because I had done, as I said, I went to first standard in Kerala, and then I had to actually repeat first standard in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to which we moved, because I didn't know English. I had to learn English from scratch. I was in a Malayalam medium place. And so anyway, 10 years of my life were outside the country, and it was up to me to decide where I wanted to go next, because obviously my father's job would have paid for me to go anywhere. But I said, if I don't go back to India now, I probably will never go back, So, and I had visited this college was familiar to me because my eldest sister studied there, and I'd visited her there, and I was quite taken up by it. So I said, I want to go to WCC. And so they said, fine. And they were still in Geneva at that time, and later they went to Australia. But I came back to India and was in the hostel, and I used to spend my holidays with my older sisters, who were by then married and had homes. And of course, I would go back to visit my parents once a year. In those days, international travel was not so easy. So I came back, and it was academically, it was not very exciting, because Madras University was supposed to be one of the better ones, but still, I think, it was...
and you were already, by then, invested in the written word, literature, and all of that was already a thing?
And I did GCE as my school leaving thing, and the standard of everything is very high in that. So here, I think it's also a little, it's also catering to people who came from other language backgrounds, etc. So it had to be simplified and then very textual. And you know how our educational system is. So I wasn't very excited by the academic part of it, but the college life was great. It was a small college. There were about 200 women in the hostel.
How many feminists among them?
We didn't talk about feminism or anything at that time. We never heard of it. In fact, I'll tell you about how my response to a question about women's lib, it used to be called in those days.
In those days, okay, women's lib. Okay.
So it wasn't. But I think it probably laid the foundation, because we were all women. And we had to do everything in the college. Even in our plays,
you had to play the male characters.
You had to play the male characters and things like that. So to some extent, I think that there is a theory anyway that women's colleges, there are still women's colleges in the US, for example. And there are a lot
Mostly
of people.
church run, right?
Huh?
Mostly church run, no?
No. Like they're called the Five Sisters in Massachusetts, which are quite well known and very. Mount Holyoke was our sister college from WCC's sister college in Massachusetts was Mount Holyoke. But there are about 5 of them. I don't remember. I think Smith and I don't remember all the names, but there are about 5 colleges. And there is a theory that women who go to women's colleges, in a way, do better because they're able to focus entirely on academics and and also develop themselves. Whereas in a mixed thing, there's always only the very strong women can really sort of assert themselves and grow into whoever they want to be. So there has always been a theory that women's colleges are actually, in a way,
more enabling
than mixed colleges. But anyway, here those 4 years were really wonderful. We had very strict rules. We couldn't go out and all kinds of things. We had to wear dupattas. Even if we were in jeans, we had to wear dupattas.
Right.
And so we used to actually make one dupatta into about 6 or 7, and each of us would have like one little string around our legs. And when we went out of the college campus, we used to stick it in one of the bushes on the way, and then pick up whoever dupatta on the way back. So it was fun.
The dupatta depot.
Yeah.
Right.
So but because we were left to our own devices in terms of we were pretty much cloistered there all the time. We became quite resourceful. The events we had, our plays were very well known in Madras. At one stage, Ammu Matthew, who was a physics teacher in our college, but she was with the Madras Players, which was an amateur theatre group in Madras, which is very well known also. So she started directing the plays. Then Girish Karnad was a close friend of hers. He used to come and sit in on our rehearsals and things like that. So, it was a very interesting time. But one thing I decided after that is that I'm not going to do my MA because I didn't want to go through that kind of academics anymore. So then I went to Bombay and I did the social communications media course in which journalism was just one part. You also had to do PR and advertising and film, TV and all that. But that was okay. But so that's where my first step into training as a journalist. But before that, in college, I had edited the college magazine, which was called Sunflower and all that. So that was my little foray into editing for the first time.
And then you wrote for this magazine where you were covering Hindi cinema in Bombay, a few actors.
Oh, that was later. I mean, I did this when I did this SEM course at Sophia College Polytechnic, we had to do an internship.
It was an internship.
Like a 1-month internship. And I I don't remember why I chose Eve's Weekly, but I went there for a month. And so when I finished the course, I was offered a job. I had anyway planned to go and do journalism properly in the US, but I had 6 months to wait for my course to begin. So I took up that job. And that's where, my assignment was to interview film stars. This is another part of my career that most people don't know about, where, and there was this, it was a peculiar thing because having grown up outside the country, I hadn't actually watched many Hindi films. A few used to come to Addis as a sort of matinee show on Saturdays. And so I'd seen a few, like Sangam I had seen and Waqt I had seen and a few things like that. But otherwise, I was really quite ignorant about Hindi cinema. And on top of that, I didn't speak Hindi. So
I can see so many advantages in being that way because number one, you are not in awe, so you're not starstruck by these people because you don't even probably know who these people are. Okay, the other thing, of course, is that outsider gaze, right? You probably watched world cinema by then, and then some comparative.
Yeah, it was quite funny because we had to pick people who could speak English first of all,
Sure. Yeah.
and those were mostly the younger people. And some of them, it was really funny. Vinod Mehra, who went on to become quite well known, halfway through telling me about some film, he looked at me and said, "Hey, I think you haven't seen this film, right?" So I'm so sorry. I used to sit. Eve's Weekly, the company also published Star and Style. So
Hmm.
before going for any interview, I would sit with the Star and Style people and get all the background.
Right.
I mean, we didn't have the internet in those days, and we didn't have. It wasn't easy to read up on people. So you had to rely on personal people briefing you personally. So I would. But what was really nice, I mean, now when I think back, with all the stuff about sexual harassment and all that has come out, it didn't even occur to me in those days, And here I was going into the homes, actually. Mostly, I was going into the homes of most of these
Yeah.
actors, and sitting there alone with them. Most of them, at least half of them, were men, young men, and never felt uncomfortable, not once.
Were
You
you
know?
lucky, or were they just?
I
Was
don't
it a different
know.
time, you think?
I really don't know.
We
I
ca-
think it was a different time, or I don't know what it was. They were so courteous. They were so nice sometimes. And I was a little bit of a spoiled brat living in Kolaba, and I'd have to go to the suburbs to interview them, and I'd make a big fuss about that, And so some of them used to say, "Can I drop you at your next interview?" And they'd take me in their car
Wow.
to the next thing and all that. So extremely nice people. I must tell you about Vinod Khanna, who, I mean, I didn't like going to their studios and things like that because then you have to wait and then they go for a shot and, all
The
that.
people around, fans, and
Yeah. So, but I did have to go to a house where Vinod
Khanna.
Mehra was, no,
No, Khanna, you said, right?
Vinod Khanna was
Hmm.
shooting. And so it got quite late. And so I said, "Oh gosh, now I have to go back to Kolaba." So he said, if you don't mind stopping in Malabar Hill on the way, because I live in Malabar Hill, and I make it a point to get home before my kids go to sleep, and so I need to stop there, and then we can my wife and I can drop you back. So I went there, and it was quite impressive actually, because he and his wife he went to see his children in bed, and then they both served dinner and said, "Why don't you have dinner?"
Wow.
Had dinner with them, and then they both came and dropped me. This was when he was still married to Gitanjali, I think her name was. And so I really had a very good experience. Rajesh Khanna was the only person I interviewed who was a really big star. I mean, I interviewed Sharmila Tagore and Shami Kapoor also, but they were not at the top of their careers like Rajesh Khanna. But his thing was also in a studio, and he was hesitant to speak English, but we managed somehow. And he was very impressed because I knew shorthand. I had a gap between my school leaving and college in India, so I did shorthand and typing in that time. So he said, "Oh, all journalists should know shorthand. And otherwise, they'd misquote and all that." And
Shorthand was a big thing back then. I mean, it's just gone from journalism now, I think.
yeah, now
I
of
mean, when
course.
I joined, it was still that it's better you pick up shorthand. In a year or two, that term was lost to us, you know. But it's fascinating to hear this because so many of my colleagues over the years have come back with horror stories dealing with these actors. The Kerala industry, you've seen what's been happening, and
Yeah.
just the other day, a colleague was interviewing someone out there only in Bombay, a very well-known name, and he really,
Yeah.
I don't want to get. It's not my story to tell,
Yeah.
But wow. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Do you want to take another shot at guessing why? Was it the era? Was it these individual men? And was it luck?
I mean, it was so many, because over 6 months, I don't remember exactly how many men I interviewed, but There were a lot, and the fact that I never once felt uncomfortable even gives me a sense that or were they on their best behavior because I was a journalist, or but in those days, and even in journalism, there was very little about sexual harassment or anything like that anyway. All that hadn't come out into the open yet. So I don't think they would have been so nervous about my writing about it or anything like that. And
But sexual harassment as a term was, I mean, do you think it is something that people would, in workplaces, wherever in life?
no, we didn't
No?
talk about it at all.
Okay.
And not that it didn't exist, because when I
Mm.
was, I don't know if you want to talk about it now, but when I was interviewing for my book on women journalists, making news, women in journalism, at that time, several people I interviewed talked about their experiences, and I was doing the interviews in the late 90s.
And experiences of dealing with actors and
No,
celebrities?
no, no, within the office mostly.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, they
Mm.
didn't. I don't know if anybody talked about. Yeah, some people did talk about some interviewers, interviewees also, but mostly it was colleagues or
Mm.
seniors.
Yeah. No, I mean, my seniors, right? You know Parvati Menon
Yeah.
and Sugandhi Ravindranathan and all of that. Mini Antika Chibar, who was in the feature section and all that. They had horror stories from even as late as the 90s and all of that, in the workplace. Anyway, but I will, of course, try and come back to this aspect a little bit. But again, to keep with the chronology, you did this little stint where you were, doing these interviews, and then you go away to the US to do a master's in journalism.
Yeah. I, of course, refused to do my GRE, so I finally got a bachelor's degree because
okay.
I didn't want to do a GRE. I said I can't do all that maths and all that. So
Right.
I don't care what the degree is as long as I can do the course.
Sure. So yeah, you go there, and then I was looking up your what you were doing and all that, and one of the things that made my eyes pop was that you had an interaction with Gloria Steinem.
Yeah.
Oh my God, she's such a, I can't say, I was so blown when I discovered her story, because I discovered it through a play that I went to in the US, which was based on her life, and she was there in the audience.
Okay.
When
was this?
This could have been a decade now. I don't know. I can't remember.
No, because she was here in Bangalore for one of the network meetings in
Really?
2007. Yeah.
Oh, this is definitely post 2007.
Okay.
I didn't discover her then. I wasn't even. I was in Mangalore then in 2007. So anyway, so Gloria Steinem is who? I mean, this person who did so many firsts, and one of the things I suppose that made her stand out is the fact that she was one of the spearheads of the second wave feminist movement in the US at that point in time, breaking newer barriers and things like that. And suddenly, from Women's Lib, they also, of course, their movements preceded ours in a sense, and so from the first wave to the second wave, in the second wave, they're talking about domestic violence, they're talking about marital rape, they're talking about wage relations, and also this is the 60s, so there was a phase post-war, post-Second World War, where suddenly there was this domestication of women all over again.
Yeah.
And
those were the times those books came out, no? The Feminine Mystique and Betty Friedman about, and the other one, can't remember the name, The Female Eunuch. That was, of course, written by a British woman, but Betty Friedman's book was a big influence on thinking differently about domestic life and being a housewife and all of that. Everybody assumes that that's a very very ideal sort of situation, but that it isn't was something that came out in that book.
And again, Steinem, if you'll allow me, one of the things that I remember from the play was this part about her life where she was she went undercover as a Playboy bunny.
Yeah.
You know,
But I think that was before her sort of feminist time.
she's an
Yeah.
evolving feminist throughout,
Yeah.
because there are phases in her life also which I discovered after that play. I
She
just
had a
kept
very difficult childhood, actually.
that she had a this happens, then this feminist awakening happens, then there's this run-in with the anti-race or the African American movement. All of that stuff is happening
Yeah.
with her, and her life is full of these reinventions. You
She
know.
also came to India as a student.
Oh,
Hmm.
okay. Uh, so all of that, you know, to take in that
Yeah.
personality, you know, to be in that under that influence, and then with all that learning, when you come back to India, there is a certain gaze, and that's what I'm interested in
Okay.
in your case, and that's why I went into just like a little description about Gloria and what her contributions were, and how did that inspire, influence, and Gloria again is I'm just using her as a metaphor, because I'm sure
Yeah.
there were so many women, like you just mentioned, out there.
But actually, I just want to go a little back, because you had asked me about where, about when we were talking about my college, about discovering feminism and all that. And when I was being interviewed for a scholarship to go to the US, I remember being asked specifically about are you, are you for women's lib or something like that? And at that time, I hadn't really thought about it. And so I
And
sort
who's
of
asking this question? Is it a woman or a man?
I think it must be a man. In those days, interviewing for funds must be man.
Right.
And I remember, now cringingly, I remember that I said, yes, but not the bra burning kind.
Wow. No, but
I mean, I really didn't know
Yeah,
much
yeah.
about it, but I'd heard about this bra burning.
Yeah.
I suppose, in a way, because of the way the media was portraying
Yeah.
the women's
The
liberation
term
movement.
itself had it was laced with misogyny, because it was not actually no bras were
And
burnt in the process.
exactly. But I was so ignorant also.
Yeah.
And, the reason why I guess I hadn't, really thought about it is because I had never experienced any kind of discrimination on grounds of gender in those days, because first of all, my family was very my mother was a working woman,
Yeah.
and in fact she even used to teach in a college in another town, so she'd be there during the week and come. She was like a weekend mom. And my grandmother I was quite small at that time. I was a little girl, I was maybe 3 or 4 at that time. So I never, and she was always the one who got up later in our house. My father was the one who made coffee. So I had that kind of a thing. So and we are 3 sisters. So not that I think if we had a brother, he wouldn't have been treated
Different.
any differently. So I grew up with that kind of in a family like that, and then throughout my childhood and adolescence, I didn't face anything that suggested to me that being female is some sort of disadvantage.
Yeah.
And so but then when I went there was my time in Syracuse University, where I did my journalism degree, was really where I discovered feminism. For one thing, the journalism school had a rule that you had to do some courses from the other faculties, because they said we're a skills school, but journalists need to have more than skills.
Perspective.
Yeah, so we had to do courses from sociology or history or political science or whatever we wanted. And for some reason, I chose a course called sex roles or something in the sociology department. And I still have the sort of book that we used for that thing. And it was mind-blowing. And it was the first time that I had been exposed to, the fact that you even grow up conditioned into being either male or female, and then what that ultimately leads to in life, and what experiences people have had. I mean, there were several chapters, several people had written in this book, which was edited by somebody called Joe Freeman. And it was really an eye-opener. And I don't know if it's that course that made me choose. In the magazine journalism course, there was one assignment where we had to go and spend time in a magazine. and write a paper on the magazine. So I chose to go to Ms. Magazine,
which is Gloria Steinem's magazine.
I mean,
wow.
a group of them started
Group of them
it.
started it, yeah.
And so I went to New York
Patricia
and
Carbarine,
spent a
yeah.
week in Ms. Magazine, interviewing all the editors and generally hanging about and getting to know what they were going through their old issues. At that time, I think it was about 3 or 4 years old, that's all. And talking to them about what they were trying to do with this magazine, etc. And I had a little bit of because I had worked in Eve's Weekly, so I had a little bit of that background. And this was also mind-blowing that this is what they wanted to do with a women's magazine, you know. So they even had advertising policies that they wouldn't accept certain kinds of ads, and they were going out for trying to break the stereotype that women don't make decisions about certain kinds of expenses, and they only make in households. And so they were going out to get the kind of ads that general magazines get, because otherwise there were very specific ads that went to
examples. Can you give us some examples?
Usually women's magazines, there's sort of boutiques and
home appliances and
food stuff, and things like that. So they went out for cars and things like that, which were the big items that people assumed women didn't have much say over.
Did they put an embargo on some brands because of their misogyny? Anything of that sort, you think?
I'm sure they did.
Wow.
But I don't remember the details now.
You don't want your money.
Yeah, I mean, certainly they wouldn't allow sexist copy or sexist sort of images and things like that. So anyway, so I think I did that
paper. I'm guessing they wouldn't have a Marlboro Man. Anyway,
but I think they had Mary Long. That there was a cigarette brand which was more or less marketing to women.
Oh,
it was
the Slims
called Mary Long. It was called some Slim
cigarettes. Yeah. Wow.
So so I think that the thing of that course plus Ms. Magazine really sort of transformed the way I was thinking about my career by then. And then I could have stayed on in the US, but I decided to go back to India. And when I came back, my old editor, Mrs. Gulshan Ewing, asked me if I would join. And she sort of lured me with the assistant editor. They didn't have a assistant editor designation at that time, but she said you can be assistant editor. So that's where I joined. I mean, and that's where I met several journalists who are still my very close friends, like
Jyoti Punwani.
Sharna Gandhi. I don't know if you remember, she passed away a couple of years ago, and she was with the Illustrated Weekly of India for a long time. She was also the editor of Gentleman magazine. So those were very lasting friendships, partly because we were in this, they had also just been exposed to feminist thinking, etc.
That is going to be my next question, actually. So at what stage in your feminism were all of you at that point? So you've come back with these influences from the US, and they've already experienced their second wave. And what is happening in Indian journalism? I mean, because some of the topics I understand you introduced, I had and I'm going to try and share some screenshots of this magazine, so you are trying to introduce topics, again, these second wave topics, which is domestic violence and, women in different arenas and a lot of women in sport. All of this is happening.
And we even had we got somebody to write sort of feminist reviews of films.
I want to get into that. But before that, I first want to ask about these individuals, right? You fantastic generation of women back then. So Jyoti, you, what stage in your ideological awakening were you? And the worst thing that happens when awakenings happen is the pushback, right? They don't want, quote unquote, bra burning feminists, as it were. And also I wanted to kind of share with you, if you'll allow me, how when you talked about this interview where you said what you did and all of that and how you evolved over time, it is a story which I kind of relate to as well, because again, see, I grew up in Bangalore where nobody knows what Mondol is. right?
Yeah.
I had the advantage of my mother, who's a highly educated upper caste woman, so a lot of these things that would have otherwise happened to me back in Bengal didn't happen to me here. And you won't believe it if I said it, because you know me as the other me. Before I went to journalism school and all of that, I was on the verge of joining this anti-reservation protest, which was what my friends were all about. And they were like, if you're from that community, you saying anti-reservation stuff is more legit. So they wanted me as that guy, you know. And then I go to ACJ, and you talked about your biggest book influence, and my biggest book influence was Kancha Ilaya's Why I'm Not a Hindu. It just flipped, something just went turned, So, and
Yeah,
when you're being doctrinal, one of the things that I suppose we forget is where we started from.
Yeah.
So tell me now, in 77 or something, you come back to India.
in 77.
Yeah.
So it was a very exciting time to be back in India, especially from the point of view of women's movements and other movements, because it was just past the emergency. And I didn't tell you about my emergency experience.
Tell me. Okay, well, let's do one thing. Let's talk about this, and then we'll go back once again, hop across.
So 1977, when I came back, the report on the status of women in India had already come out. 1975 was 1975 was the first International Year of Women that the UN had declared. And I think as part of that, the government had commissioned this study, which many of the major stalwarts, Ila Bhatt and Devki Jain and Veena Mazumdar and all these, activists as well as academics, well-known academics and some lawyers. All of them were part of Lutika Sarkar. All these people were part of it, I think. Anyway, and they went around the country researching women's status. And this book, the report, I think, was either 75 or 76 or something like that. So it had already come out by the time I came back. And so there were the stirrings of, people. That was the first time people realized this is the situation on education, healthcare, this, that, and the other, in different fields, employment. And there was a sense that something needed to be done about it. And of course, then the UN declared a decade for women. And that was 75 to 85. So it was that kind of thing where internationally also there was stirrings which were now reaching the so-called southern countries as well. And so Jyoti was already involved in civil liberties organizations and activism and all that. And Sherna had just come back, I think, from a university in England where she had also been exposed to feminist thinking. So there were the three of us, and with this very traditional women's magazine. And we said, we've got to change this, And fortunately for us, the editor, Gulshan Ewing, was also the editor of Star and Style. And actually, she was more interested in that than Eve's Weekly. So she had some pet features in Eve's Weekly. But apart from that, she didn't really mind what we did with the rest.
So you had the magazine to yourself?
Pretty much. Except,
wow. And how old were you then?
27.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's actually the age I feel sometimes to head a place, because you're...
No, not even 27. I was 24, I think,
Wow.
when I came back. Yeah, I was born in 1950.
And this is a magazine that's going to different parts of India, right? It's like a national...
It was. I think it was not the largest seller because Femina had the Times of India thing, but it was the oldest women's magazine, and it was
run by
a national magazine.
Run by a bunch of women who are in the age category, which is the least cynical, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So let me just think. I was born in 1953 and I came back in 1977, so 24.
Goodness. And how old was Jyoti then?
She's 1 year younger than me, so
wow.
23. And Sherna was about the same age, or maybe a little older than me. So we just said, okay, now let's get to it, And so systematically, we just started commissioning articles, getting new columns, and, we didn't interfere with the staples. I mean, the fashion pages. Then there was always crochet or knitting or something, embroidery. And then there was cookery recipes and things. So those three things we didn't want to interfere either, because we said, okay, I mean, these are also part of women's lives, and why should we deny, and frankly, of the three of us, I enjoy cooking. I still enjoy cooking. So we left those kinds of things there, but all the features and things like that, we completely changed. I mean, Jyoti in those days, in the late 70s, wrote an article about Ram, which I think today would create
Ram
a
and Sita.
huge furor. Yeah.
Yeah.
We got letters to the editor about it, but they were mostly polite and saying, well, there is this, it's not, I mean, what she's written is not correct. One of the letters started, please note, Ram is God. But it was so polite and civilized, the reaction was so civilized. It's like, okay, this is what you think, and we don't think this way. And some people supported what she had written about his treatment of Sita and all that. I wrote a piece asking, was Jesus Christ a liberated man?
Was he?
I personally think so, yes.
Okay.
So...
you want to get into that?
But many of the others who followed him were not, but I think he was. So we just, had this column on women in sports, and then we had women in cinema, looking at cinema in a different way. We I think we went through short stories. There were a lot of short stories that used to be, people used to send it to Eve's Weekly, and we would decide whether we were going to publish it or not. And, now looking back, some very well-known writers also wrote stories for us, including Shashi Deshpande. So even the short stories I was going through, if it was sexist, reject.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually, that's what I wanted to ask you. So I was a little taken aback when I discovered that there were sexist pieces in the first place in a women's magazine. And then I had to learn the fact that it's a women's magazine, not necessarily a feminist or
exactly,
and that you were pushing against the envelope. And I found it a little weird, that a feminist in a women's magazine would be a bit of an outcast, or somebody who's pushing the envelope,
Well, traditional women's magazines didn't question the status quo at all, no? It just sort of
run by men, basically, you think?
Originally, yeah, many of them were edited by men. Yeah,
at least produced by them.
Even in India. No, edited also. I think Vimla Patil and Mrs. Ewing was probably the first woman editor of a women's magazine.
What an outrage. I mean,
yeah. And then Vimla Patil, when Mrs. Ewing actually was with Femina, then when she moved to Eve's Weekly, then I think Vimla Patil took over.
And you guys introduced a feminist humor column, and I was like, introduced? I thought it would have been there in the first place.
Oh my God, that humor column was the worst thing, because we had one was called Hiya Honey, and the other one was called Madam, I'm Adam. So you can imagine what these columns were like. They were really awful.
But for the benefit of our viewers, tell us, what were they like? What broadly?
It was basically
innuendo and like cheap shit, or like
all these kind of no. It was basically about these sort of brainless women, and I don't even remember because I stopped reading them long ago.
The gall to have.
No, but they happened to be friends of the editor, so it was really difficult to persuade her that
and these were men.
Have to drop it. Yeah. So we said we just cannot have these columns.
I'm not talking about the editors. The writers were men.
The writers were men. George Menezes and somebody. Anyway, so it was tough for her, I think, but ultimately she agreed. So, I mean, hats off to Mrs. Ewing, because she had these, sort of rebellious staff who were pushing her to do things which didn't come naturally to her. I mean, she herself was obviously an independent woman if she had become a journalist at her age and risen to become editor and all that. She obviously was an unconventional woman, but she wasn't, sort of disturbing the status quo.
She couldn't
until then.
perhaps, you
All
think,
this, I mean, I think we were just lucky that we were, we became adults and came into a field like journalism at a time like this when
Yeah.
there was already a churn. So I don't know if we had been born 10 years earlier, whether we would have been like that. It was just it was lucky for us, and that we had, and then it was lucky that we had an editor whom we could pressurize, and who ultimately saw the sense of what we were saying and let us do our own thing. So ultimately, when they called in an ad agency to do an ad campaign for us, this woman from the ad agency said, "You know what you have? You have a schizophrenic magazine."
Right.
Because there's all this sort of very radical stuff in the as features, and then the cover would be this beautiful woman. That was one thing Mrs. Ewing didn't want to change. So even I think that we had a special issue on rape in March 1980.
The Mathura rape case.
Yeah,
I saw those editions. Yeah. I'm going to try and share those screenshots with you guys. Yeah.
March 1980 was the first International Women's Day after the campaign against rape, sparked off by the Mathura rape case judgment. So we said this whole issue is going to be dedicated to rape, and so different aspects of rape. So the first article...
Can I just interrupt you there? For those of you who don't know, so the Mathura case, is where the Supreme Court basically, how do you put it, morally judged the woman.
Pretty much.
Basically said that, hey, you're accustomed to sex and therefore you cannot be raped. And she was raped by policemen.
Two
policemen. Anyway,
it was one of those. It was one of the first publicized instances of custodial rape. So we had an article on custodial rape, probably the first in any publication in India. And we had an article on marital rape. We had, childhood sexual abuse, all kinds of things. So it was quite this thing. But the cover was, I think, this woman with some kind of sitar or something.
Right. No, that's great. That's a Trojan horse for me, isn't it? It's a nice.
But as a result of the covers, and anyway, people look down on women's magazines in journalism, in the profession. Magazine journalism was one step below newspaper journalism.
One step above, no? One step above, no? I mean, I was in the Hindu. Frontline is always above.
That was later, but at that time there were all these hierarchies, and then so the news is more important than features, and features in a newspaper are different from magazines, which are entirely, then women's magazines and all were like bottom of the pile. So many of them, including even some of our progressive journalist friends, would never open a women's magazine, even when we were working there. And they'd say, "Why are you wasting your time?" kind of thing, like it's like, I was thinking today on my walk, I said it's literally like at one time people used to say, "Why are you doing arts? You're good enough to do science." So like, why are you wasting your time in a women's magazine when you could be doing anything in journalism, kind of thing. Wow. So there was but it was such an exciting time. I think I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was because it's not very often that you get to actually transform a publication, And then that was also the time that the Feminist magazine called Manushi came out. And, we all used to read, could subscribe and read and, support it. But they published at least a couple of articles on women's magazines, which was so unfair and ill-informed, I mean, they hadn't bothered to. And it was all a conspiracy theory. It's like everybody's trying to...
So they would see you as what, co-opted?
Yeah, I mean, like part of the whole thing of, selling women these things, and, how the whole thing is determined by advertising companies and corporates. And
so this internal battle that you were fighting was completely
ignored. And they knew, I mean, we were their subscribers and readers. They could have just asked us,
For a quote, at least.
something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, one has written a lot about women's magazines since then.
Yeah.
Just to put the, to sort of set the record straight.
Wow. That's such a broad sweep of, history in a sense. I mean, fantastic. Thank you for that. I have two supplementaries drawn from what you said, actually. One is an Indira Gandhi question, and the second one is this Jesus question, really. The reason I say that is because, in the morning, just today, I was talking to my colleague Bharti, and we often have this discussion, about paganism, Catholicism, Protestantism, all of these things, and what it means for gender, what it means for race, what it means for slavery, what it means for the world, and all of that. Witchcraft, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, tell me, what is this thing about Jesus? Is he awakened? What is your take on it? What's your ism on that? Like, give me that one.
I told you I wrote that article,
Yeah.
and that was sparked by the fact that my two sisters had babies within a month of each other. One was a boy and one was a girl, and they had their baptisms together. And I belong to the Orthodox Church, not Catholic or Protestant.
Syrian Orthodox. No.
It's a complicated thing, but there are basically three big things in the Christian churches. Three big groupings. One is Catholics, of course, the Roman Catholic. Then there's Protestant, and then there's Orthodox, which also has many. Like there's the Russian Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox, Ethiopian Orthodox, Indian Orthodox, Syrian Orthodox. But anyway, so it's slight differences in theology and all that. They were both in the church for their baptism, and at one point the boy gets taken around the altar and the girl doesn't. I said, what's this? They're just two babies. What difference does it make? So I got really irate about that, and I started the article with that, saying, and my thing was that when did all this creep in? And then I just looked at whatever interactions Jesus had with women and what he said about women and their place, and things like that. And I found that the church is going
Magdalene
completely
and all of
against
Magdalene, and you mean that stuff?
Yeah, first of all, Mary Magdalene, and then there were many other things where people wanted to stone some sex worker, and he said, let anyone who has not sinned
cast the first
stone. And then there was that Martha and Mary. There's two sisters who had a brother called Lazarus, who he is supposed to have raised from the dead. But when they were sitting and talking, Martha was going to get, everybody was there, and so she went to get food and everything. Mary just sat with him and continued with him and all the other disciples and all that, and was talking with joined the conversation. And Martha came and said, please tell her to come and help in the kitchen or whatever. And then he said, each person should do what they... I don't remember exactly what he said, but basically he said, no, each person chooses what they want to do, and there's nothing that you have to do because,
It's gender.
Yeah. And so, and then several others there, I think then of course when he is supposed to have risen from the dead, he showed himself to women first. Because they were the only ones who had the courage to wait outside his...
They're the ones who took the Romans
Everybody else ran off. So, there are many, I don't remember all these things, but there was no indication that he looked at men and women differently. Because friends have said, but all his disciples were men.
The ones who we know of.
The 12, the 12 who are famous, whose names are there. As the apostles, not disciples, they were both, but apostles were all men. So, so I mean, that might have been, but whatever he said and did, I feel, give me the sense that he didn't see a difference and didn't put women on a lower this thing where churches do.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So which is why one of the reasons why I'm not a churchgoer. I'm not a practicing Christian that
But
way.
you're
in terms
preaching
of,
so well. Look at you preach. Come on, go for it.
No, but I mean, I say if I call myself a Christian at
Yeah.
all, it's because of Jesus.
Of course.
Nobody else.
Mhm.
Literally nobody else.
Jesus of Nazareth. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Christification is where I think trouble started.
Yeah.
But thanks for that. That's very interesting as a perspective. And Bharati, if you are watching this, we are going to pick up on this conversation and have some more discussions.
Yeah, one of my friends has said, I said, I'll send you the article. And he said, I expect a lot of criticism. I said, anyway, I can always plead youth.
But now look at you, you still,
still
I mean,
do
in
believe
hindsight,
that.
you stand
Yeah.
by it. And that's, there's so many things that I've done in the past that I don't stand by. But that, okay, so this Indira Gandhi thing. So what I wanted to ask you is, so that you're here, there's this global churning happening around the question of women. The United Nations, India has conducted this huge study of the government commission study of women and all of that. And then you have this figure, the female dictator, I can't say I would have been completely unsympathetic to her, as a woman, or, saying that she's one of us at least, like, I mean, we've had like all these dictators, and wow, this female dictator, did you even feel an iota of that, you think? At that time, a sense of, wow, look at this woman.
Wow,
Indira Gandhi?
You mean as
a
during
dictator,
the
as a
emergency time?
Huh?
I mean, because of the emergency or even before?
See, she was this strong person anyway. I mean, she
she
became a formal semi-dictator.
I can't say I'm an expert. I mean, I've read up enough on Indira Gandhi to be able to comment authoritatively. But from my impression, I don't think she started off as a very strong woman. I think she was actually very shy.
You think so?
And
Okay.
I think she really was very shy, and she was didn't have much self-confidence and all that. And then suddenly she was thrust into this role, and had to fight all these had to deal with all these patriarchs. And I think that's when she sort of felt that she couldn't do it without really becoming
Authoritarian.
seen as this thing. So I think in a way it was almost like a reaction to the fact that she wasn't actually a very confident person, because I think very confident women don't really have to resort to authoritarianism.
But there was no sense of, no soft corner, nothing, you think, for this
for me?
emergency? No, for this emergency guy, Indira Gandhi, do you think there was this?
No, I think we were all very much against the curtailment of civil liberties and
No, of course you
human
were.
rights and all
I mean,
that.
it's a bit of a silly question, actually. I'm just thinking, like if there were to be a Dalit dictator at some point, and I would have to guard against the feeling of, okay, this is vendetta now. Take it, Okay, anyway. Moving on from Indira Gandhi and that period and all of that, I want to get into this.
But I told you I must tell you my little story about the emergency.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
That 6 months before I went to the US was the time when the emergency was. When I just joined Eves Weekly was when the emergency was declared. And I would have thought I would have very little to do with the emergency, because I was in this women's magazine and interviewing all these film stars. But we had a columnist called Devyani Chaubal who used to write a gossip column, film gossip column. So that was one thing that our managing director felt would not pass the censors. So he got to know that the chief censor of Maharashtra was Mr. Binod Rao.
Binod Rao, yeah.
Who was my...
Kalpana spoke about him as well.
Who was my journalism teacher at Sophia.
Wow.
So he said, now we have an in with the chief censor. So I used to carry, in those days there were those galleys, which it was all linotype and proofs and things.
Just
like
explain
that.
What that is once again for younger people, please. Yeah, what is this galleys thing?
The copy was sent down to the typesetting, and then they would set the type, and then these long strips of paper with the columns used to come up, which was proofread, and then those things were cut and made into pages, and it was all that. So
Yeah.
so her galleys would come up, and then I would take it to
You
Mr. Rao. And I remember the first time, I usually never think of the right thing to say at the right time. I'm not very good at all that. But
You're a
that
print reporter.
time, I think I was so incensed by the idea that my journalism teacher was the chief censor. So I walked in and said, "Well, Mr. Rao, I never thought we would meet across this desk." And I
Wow.
think it looked a bit sheepish. But anyway, passed Devyani's copy, which was all that really I was there for.
Right.
So that was my little emergency story
Running with the machine. Wow.
with a film gossip column. Nothing very
Yeah.
serious.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so moving on, there is, like I said, there's this elephant, and I've probably now just touched the tip of the tusk. Okay, I am going to try and have like a quick conversation about NWMI, if you'll allow me. So run me through the process perhaps that led to NWMI, because now you're what, 1,000 people strong?
About 850. But right now, I think we're just going to probably, yeah. But it's like every week there's like people wanting to join.
Yeah. Again, one of those things which I am very taken in by, inspired by, saying that, hey, could there ever be an SC/ST journalist, thing all over the country, perhaps, something like that. But, for you back then, doing this must have sounded to the uncles who are running the newspapers as this woman is leading our reporters astray, this union leader or whatever. Did you ever receive any kind of
No.
hostility, you think? No?
No, not at all. And we were, never anyway setting out to be a union type of thing anyway. But the whole thing started actually because, as I was saying, my second book was on women journalists. It was commissioned by the Media Foundation of India. And so I think we got a small grant which allowed for a little bit of travel. But most of the time, if I was going somewhere to attend a conference or whatever, I would just take a few days to interview people in those places. So that way I managed to interview people in quite a few parts of the country. And also where I had no way of getting to, I sent questionnaires and, so in Northeast and some other places, Kashmir and places like that, we got people who, through questionnaires. But in the end, the book was based on the inputs of more than 200 women from across the country, writing in different languages. And television was not yet, there was only Doordarshan at that time. It was, I think there was Pranoy Roy's thing for Doordarshan.
The World This Week.
The World This Week, that was there.
Yeah.
But otherwise, television hadn't become a major place for journalists to be. So throughout, I kept hearing from women that, we really should have some kind of association or something, because at that time the Indian Women's Press Corps had been started in Delhi, but that was really more like a club. That was like, there was the Delhi the Press Club of India, which is based in Delhi. There was that, and then the women who formed the IWPC sort of moved out of that to set up a different kind of space for journalists who were women. And so it was basically a Delhi-based club more than any kind of association to which people all over the country could belong. So I just felt at the end of the thing that there was some kind of a feeling among women journalists that we should have some way of connecting with each other. And then there's an NGO here called Voices, and I used to work with their journal. I was a consulting editor for their journal, and then at one point I stopped doing that, and then when Ashish Sen asked me, do you have anything that you think we should be doing and all that? So I said, well, this is something that I sort of picked up in my interviews, that women journalists would like to form some kind of an organization, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know how many people said that, and if it's a widespread feeling, I don't know. But if we could have some kind of meetings of women journalists in different parts of the country to figure out whether it is in fact a kind of felt need. And then we can go about thinking about what kind of organization. So that's what we did. We organized these. There was one in Bangalore where people from 6 states and 5 languages, or the other way around, came. And then we had one in Jaipur where more people from the north and center, and we hoped the northeast, but then and east also. So Bengal and all of them we met in Jaipur.
And quickly, these are all women who are paying their own passage. You have no funding.
No. That particular section we did get funds.
Okay.
So we did.
Okay, but it is true of NWMI that you are not a funded organization.
We're not.
Wow.
No.
I mean, yeah.
So this was all pre-NWMI. This was just an exploratory thing, which was facilitated by this NGO. So they were able to receive some funds, and we felt that the Northeast got left out as usual. So then we had a third one in Shillong, managed to raise money for that as well. And so then by the end of these 3 meetings from October 2000 to September 2001.
Yeah.
And so then we were all pretty confident because we had planned 3-day meetings, and the first day we will talk about this, and only on the third day we will say, should we have an organization? But from the first day, everyone said we want an organization. So it was like quite clear that this was an idea whose time had come. And so then so that's why we always say it's a bottom-up process, and it was answering a kind of felt need, and so it was not something that we just dreamed up we should have, kind of thing. And then we had the first national meeting of women journalists in India was in Delhi in January 2001. 2002. And again, it was 3 days, and we had many panels and talks and all that. And at the end of it, we had this thing saying, what kind of an organization? And some people said, of course, somebody from Kerala said that we have to have, charter. We have to have a charter with, this thing. So they went off and sat under some tree and drafted a charter. And so it was everyone putting things together. But the biggest debate that we had was structure, and there was a whole lot of there was a very strong group arguing that you cannot have an organization without proper structure, office bearers, and all of that. I mean, you just
That's
have,
another
otherwise
standout
it
feature.
won't last. And there were some of us who were saying, no, let's give it a try. I mean, the whole thing is the feminist collective. And so let's see if it works. I mean, we don't know. If it doesn't work, we can always go back to the tried and tested thing of president, vice president, and all of that.
You think it's a male structure, that president, vice president?
I guess so, because men were in charge of organizations mostly. Not many women were in charge of organizations. So I presume
about male architecture. Phallic architecture, if you want to call it that. In design, and so much of design is phallic design. But you think organization structure is?
I think it's. I mean, we finally the ones who were arguing for the collective, non-hierarchical, non-informal, kind of collective one.
Yeah, that's evident. I mean, that's a standout feature of NWMI now, right? That you don't have any.
We don't have. There's nobody in charge actually. But then there were still people who felt that it won't last, and you have to have a structure if you want it to last. And so almost every national meeting after that for the next few years, there would be a whole session to decide on registration. Because we're not a registered organization either. And but I think, after a few, every time people were I think everyone felt it would change the nature of the organization in some way. So we would have a debate and then ultimately put off the decision. But after some years, we stopped having the debate also. I think everybody said we'll just carry on like this. We don't have a bank account because of that, because if you're not registered, you can't have a bank account. So naturally, this is not a problem because we don't have funds either to put in the bank account. But we do raise funds sometimes, and we get funds to do research projects and all that, but then it's paid directly to whoever. Now, when we have our national meetings, we actually, everybody used to pay their own way, right, in the beginning, to national meetings. But then we realized that in a way that was also excluding people who couldn't afford it. So we said we really need to do something about this. So then we started, we ourselves started contributing extra to fund people who couldn't afford their this thing. And even now, registration fees, many of us pay for 2-3 people so that some people don't have to pay. And so we, that kind of, then finally at one point, I think RSF, Reporters Sans Frontier, and came forward and said, what can we do? And then we said, this is one thing that you could help with, is because more and more people wanted to come, and there's a limit to how much just a few members could contribute. So then they started, but again, we'd have to go through a travel agent who was willing to do that, get to do the bookings on trust and then get paid by somebody else and things like that. So it's worked out. It makes everything a little more complicated and difficult. But as long as, we raised all that money for the Afghan women.
Okay, so not NWMI per se, and this again, I might have to remind you this, which is that people in your network were such a backbone for what I have been trying to do for the last, since I passed out of journalism school, which is to get more Dalits and Adivasis into the Asian College of Journalism, the scholarship thing and all of that. And so many I could just blindly depend on, okay, there are these, women in that collective who will definitely support. So that's something you've supported over the years, not as NWMI, but as
individuals.
But individuals who cannot in a way be separated from NWMI and that identity. And, this description makes it sound like a place which was built with a lot of love and care, I would say.
Yeah, even now, I think we make even the travel grants, the main thing is people from disadvantaged backgrounds, whether it's caste or economic. And
region also, right? You could be from the northeast.
Also tribe, Adivasis, and then region. And especially, long distance and then conflict areas and, things like that. So that's those are the kind of criteria that I used.
I just have 2 more questions on this, and I don't know, I'm definitely going to overshoot time like crazy because my big segment is yet to come, where I want to talk about your children's writing. But about NWMI, about bringing a subordinated subpopulation of society together, right? You're talking about socially excluded people. You're talking about socially economically excluded people, as bringing women together. So that there is that common layer, which is perhaps a binding force. But that's perhaps also where the similarities might end, right? You could have not just differences of opinion on what constitutes feminism, but also, some of them might be Sanghi, some of them might be also. And I remember you making this very clear, saying that that NWMI is a bipartisan organization to that extent, which is that there are all sorts of women with all sorts of beliefs.
We don't ask for people.
That is very difficult to achieve. So now here you're saying that there is no president, vice president. There is no organization structure. There's no funding model. There's nothing of that sort. And yet you've managed to keep a bunch of people who might disagree with each other diametrically together for like 20 years now. How difficult has that been?
I think sometimes I feel a little guilty because I think the most vocal people in the network, we are mostly a virtual network, right? Most of the time we are interacting either on email or WhatsApp. Or whatever. So most of the time it's only at these national meetings. And of course, locally people meet. But at the national level, we meet once a year at the most, and not everybody can come for that. for various reasons. So I feel a little guilty because I do feel that the most vocal people in the network are the liberal, secular, progressive people. And I do worry sometimes that people who don't agree with that, and have a different view on politics, don't actually speak up. Maybe they don't feel free to speak up, or maybe they feel that they'll be jumped upon. So
I mean, I'm not like what I think counts, but that's not a bad thing, no? If you have the
it's
non-secular, okay, so we have the non-secular, non-liberal, non-progressive person holding the mic, then
yeah, I mean, it is a little. I don't suppose I should feel very guilty about it, because the larger world in which we are, it's the opposite. I mean, the loudest voices are and the most powerful right now are the ones who are not secular and not liberal and progressive. So in a way, it's a kind of little safe space that we have, where we can be on the bandbox. What do they call it? The soapbox.
soapbox, right? Stand on a
Yeah.
soapbox, right?
And
But
yeah.
that formation also would have had its stressors, right? Because let's say, okay, now you've reduced it, or not reduced it or whatever, but like you've created a finite thing of there are liberal, progressive things and women who are the core in a sense of NWMI. But that is again just one type of coming together. There's another greater commonality, let's even say, because of this thing. But then caste might play a role.
Yeah.
Religion might play a role. Because there are further gradations of this thing, and that could have also contributed to these fiery debates and all that. How difficult was that to deal with? You think?
I think we've had some discussions about. I think we've always gone out of our way to make it an inclusive space. I mean, you spoke at one of our.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
2016. I think you spoke at our thing. So we've always tried to have discussions so that that everybody knows that, as far as we are concerned, these kinds of things shouldn't separate us. I mean, there are these things which we don't approve of, and which we really have to do our best to overcome. And even if the majority of people, I don't even know whether they're all, what caste they come from and background and all that, but the chances are that a certain, especially when we know that the representation of Dalits and Adivasis in the media is very low, so naturally it's likely to be the case in the network as well. But at almost every meeting, we try to make sure that people know where what that's not a good thing, and that we really need to do something to change that. So, but I think the one thing where we have faced a very real problem is recently with the Manipur nightmare that's been going on there for the past 1.5 years.
You must be having Kuki and Meitei women in your.
So, I think people felt that, people left, because they felt that they're mainly Meitei.
How sad is that?
And who've been with
and
the network for a very long time.
And Meitei women and the role that they have played to bring attention to
so many
uniform wearing violence against women, right?
Yeah.
The contributions that they've made to expand that conversation, because I don't think that those voices were as strong from Kashmir as they were from Manipur, really. Wow. And Meitei women
very famously, I can see. I mean, in fact, in 2007, was it 2007 was 2009, I think, our national meeting was in Imphal. And it was a great exposure to many of us, because we landed and found that it was curfew, and they hadn't told us that there's curfew in Manipur at that time, because they thought many of us wouldn't come. So we landed and found that they had curfew. Like the whole day was curfew, and then there were like these little times when you could go out and shop, etc. So it was a real exposure to us, and that it also happened to be the particular time of the year when what's her name? The one who used to be in hospital.
Hirom Sharmila.
Hirom Sharmila. So Hirom Sharmila came out of the hospital. The Mirabaibis received her as usual. Then they all sat in in a place under a shamiana and all that. We sat with them, and then of course because she wouldn't eat and all that, and they would take her back the same evening. She would be back in hospital. So so we were there, we witnessed that and everything, so it was so. And then we formed this, we were going to have a national meeting in Guwahati in 2020, and that was the time just before that, a few months before that, a Northeast group was formed and a lot more people joined and everything. So it was a very nice thing to have all people from different states in one group. And so that was where a lot of discussions about developments in the Northeast used to happen. And then, of course, when this conflict started, there were people who were posting things from their particular points of view and experiences and things like that. And I think at that time, generally, the feeling was that because of who was in government, and because of that the cookies were at the receiving end, kind of thing. So a lot of such stuff was being posted in that group, and finally some of the Maitai members felt that they couldn't, they couldn't take it anymore, and they left. So that was like, I think, the first time we've had that kind of an experience where, some members actually felt alienated enough to leave. And that's still a very, sort of sad part of our things, which we're hoping our next national meeting is in Guwahati
and that you can have them back perhaps or something.
So we're hoping that, at least some of them will come. And then we can have a discussion on the, side to see how we can, at least as women and as journalists, overcome the, sort of the other identities and the conflict. So, yeah, so I think it's, we have a lot of Kashmiris now, and they come for meetings. Very enthusiastic and things, but this has been the most, I think, traumatic experience that I can remember in the network in more than 22 years.
I'm sorry for your loss. I hope there'll be amends.
I don't think it'll be a permanent loss. I hope not, because I think especially a couple of them who have been with us for a long time, they're very committed to the idea of the network. So hopefully it'll all reconcile at some point.
Inshallah. Okay, this last segment, if you'll allow me, is this 8 years of your life where you are writing a column for children in the Hindu young world. I had no clue about this. I don't know how many of
because I wrote under a pseudonym.
But then in our network of people who admire Ammu, this has never come up in a conversation. I wonder why.
Very few people, except the people at Young World, knew. Although actually I used to go, in those days there was no email, so I had to go to the Hindu office with my copy, and they had to send it by whatever.
Like in a floppy or something, you think?
No, this was like paper.
Wow.
And I guess they sent it through the teleprinter or whatever it was at that time. I don't know what technology they used at that time.
Okay. No, I just want to tell you that I discovered it just this morning because it came up in conversation and you sent me this dossier. I was sobbing and howling. It just turned me very emotional. To see that kind of writing being made available to that category of people who, for whatever reason, just don't exist in our. We don't think about children. We don't think about what they should be thinking, what we can make them think about. And then suddenly you have this person called Uma. That's your pseudonym, right? In that column that you wrote, which is called Spaced Out. Spaced Out, and this column written by Uma. And Uma is having a conversation with, or is talking about her conversations with her friend, who is RS, who is supposedly not from this planet and all of that. What I want to do, and that I suppose will help you understand where I choked up, okay? This is the first opening, your first piece. I am going to try and read from that.
Maybe while you're finding it, I should say that, some people, like my artists, for example, some of the artists I know said, we read your Spaced Out regularly because that's the only way we can understand what's going on in this world. Like Narmada and all that. How can we? Because, a lot of our newspaper reporting presumes knowledge. It doesn't sort of give you background, and it doesn't. So if you haven't been following a particular issue or a story, that particular report doesn't make much sense to you. So they said, we can only understand Narmada and all that after reading Spaced Out.
To think that the main paper didn't do the job, So, okay, I'm going to try and read this. This is your first Spaced Out piece, the first piece. My name is Uma. I'd like to share a secret with you and also ask for your help in solving a problem I'm facing. You see, I have an unusual new friend called RS. I'm afraid I can't tell you whether RS is a girl or boy because I don't know. And this is where I choked up. Because I'll tell you why also later. And I don't know because RS isn't sure. Where she/he comes from. They don't make a big fuss about all that. Oh goodness. Okay, so here we are in 1990. And we are talking about breaking this stupid binary. It made me wonder. Here we are talking about being from a certain caste and religion and all that. This made me really go back into my childhood and wonder, at what point did we become men and women? These assumed identities that we have, and also it took me to. So I've worked with children a little bit. I've tried to work with children, and I used to coach this team.
I remember.
And there was a boy. I'm using that term, carefully, because so he was the butt of all jokes because he was the chakka. Right, and we are having a football training session, and that's what I used to do with the kids, and so the kids would tease him and things like that. And of course, he was good at so many other things, including football and all of that. But this thing was happening. Of course, I shut that down. But I did have other friends from the community to come and speak with him, observe, work with him, and all of that. But ultimately, what happens to perhaps, and my estimation, to perhaps overcompensate for all of this, at the age of 17, he runs away to get married to a girl, and I read your stuff and I was like, oh, I wish he read English, that this was available to him, that it is okay who you are, these things. And for somebody to be writing about these things in 1990, I was really overwhelmed. I had goosebumps, I spoke to Pooja in the morning about it. I called another colleague and I told her that, did you know this about Ammu, and that she's to write, and what you're writing? Right, so there's this stuff about gender, patriarchy, sexuality, and all of that. There's also Babri Masjid.
That first one was
Ayodhya.
And religion.
Right, Jerusalem, and you're talking about other conflicts, religious conflicts in the world, and you're trying to explain to RS, the alien, why we fight over religion and things like that. And I'm just thinking here that so just the other day when Dhanya and I were doing this chat, we were talking about how journalism of record, which is why we're doing all of this. This is not changing the world. Fascism is still right outside this door. Why do we do this? Because we want to leave a record. And then I read your stuff and I said, no, because we've given up on this writing for change. things are not changing with our writing out there. But I see this, and I see that this is something that can actually help change, and this is something that is coming to somebody at that very impressionable age.
Yeah, I think as I told you that I used to get masses of letters
Yeah,
from, and in those days it was all inland
Yeah.
letters and in those covers and things like that. And we used
one
to,
of those letters. Sorry to interrupt you, and I'm going. It's you are the one who needs to talk over here. But I just want to give
No,
you my this. So there's this kid again. I choked over there. Who's saying, "I have a cat and a dog. They're not supposed to be friends, but they get along. Why is it that?" Oh goodness, and that's the impact you're having with these people.
I think it's also what was reassuring for me was that the majority of the letters that came in were sort of on the side of rights and justice and
Mm.
all of that. And so I said that is the natural. Obviously, these are children, so this is the natural response of children, and like before they get influenced by all the other stuff that's out there in the world, if they have some kind of reassurance that what they themselves think is fine and it's okay and
Yeah.
it's better than all this other stuff.
Yeah.
So I thought, that's what I think in one of the anniversary issues where, the 25th anniversary issue of Young World is where I was outed as Uma.
Mhm.
And then
As Ammu.
No, as Uma. That is the first time that in public Ammu Joseph confessed that she was Uma.
Oh, okay. Oh, like that. Okay.
Yeah. And then in the 30th anniversary issue also I wrote. And so I'm just hoping that those children who read it and wrote to me and all that managed to hold on to that
I'm sure they did.
idealism.
I can't imagine how they would have.
The world is quite a different place, no? And
Hmm.
especially as they've grown up, politics has also become worse and worse. And, so I don't know. But I remember once I'd gone to the University of Chicago to speak, and the young man who came and picked me up at the airport, I had to send my biodata and all that. So in that I had mentioned that I wrote. So he said, "Ma'am, I didn't know you wrote Young World. Spaced Out. I grew up on Spaced Out."
Wow.
I said, "Oh my God, what a lovely thing to hear,
How rewarding it must be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, I didn't ask him, do you still believe all that?
Yeah.
But it was nice that, somebody who is now doing his PhD or whatever still remembered a column that he
Yeah.
used to read as a child.
Yeah, they say, that it takes a village to raise a child and a newspaper and a column like this, perhaps.
No, I must say that I appreciate. I have to, express my appreciation of Nirmala Lakshman for believing in me.
Nirmala was quite something. Yeah.
Of course, we were college friends.
Mhm.
We were classmates in college, but the fact that she said, "Okay, go with it," because most people say, "Oh, why do you want to bother children with all
With
these
Ayodhya and all of
all
that,
those
but why not?
negative or serious things?" They have,
Caste and
they
yeah.
grow up, they have to deal with it.
Deal
Let
with
them
it.
have a nice, innocent childhood and all that. And I said, that things, they're already exposed to things.
Yeah.
Television.
You have to
had
make
also-
sense of it, actually.
Yeah, one needs to help them make sense of it and develop a kind of sensitivity to things and all that. And I really, appreciate the fact that she said, "Okay, we'll just do it. We'll see how it goes." And then, of course, it turned out to be very popular.
So the funny thing about the Hindu, is it's a progressive newspaper for conservative people. Okay, it goes to a Mylapore, it goes to a Malleshwaram, and I'm thinking, this is landing in people's houses, and children are reading in places where it might not be welcome. And what a radical thing, what a revolutionary thing to have done at that point.
Some of the letters actually were from adults also. So I'm quite surprised, I told you about the artists, but some sort of grown-up people used to write. And I think in a way it's a comment on the way these issues are covered in our mainstream press. It's not broken down enough to make sense to people who don't necessarily follow these issues.
And I think for children, I don't know if there is anything like that out there
Anymore? Yeah.
Is there?
Maybe some of these, I don't know, maybe there's some of the graphic novels and things like that. I don't
But
know.
that's a different thing
Yeah.
altogether. But one of the things that you said actually struck me again about children, which is how we report on children. And I think this is a lesson that I could learn from a lot and probably try and implement it in our journalism, which is they are completely voiceless in our reportage on children's issues also, let's even say. They're
Yeah,
not
that's
quoting
true.
children. There is a legal thing around it as well, which is, putting a camera in front of a child.
Yeah.
All of those
Yeah.
things are problems. And I remember, depending on different editors, some editors said you cannot quote a child.
Really?
Yeah, because it is not, whatever they're saying is not informed by
No,
age.
I mean,
and
you
they
can
don't
quote
know
them
what
on what they are thinking, no?
But what do you think about that? That we like our children quiet and
Yeah.
what is that
Seen
Victorian
but not
adage?
heard.
Seen and not heard. Yeah.
Yeah. But but I just wanted to say that within journalism, all these hierarchies of what's important,
Yeah.
journalism and all that, I think writing for children comes very low. I think stories, I mean, children's books and children's stories and things like that, fiction is different. But and then of course tell me why type of books. But this
Yeah, the tell
kind
me
of
whys
things
are the
within the media, I think writing for children is seen as, oh God, I mean, like, why? Again,
Yeah.
like for me, it is, I've always been doing things like people would say, why are you wasting your time with this kind of thing? Almost everything I've done in my career is something that most people would say, oh, why are you wasting your time doing this? You could.
Thanks for doing that. And I'm just so happy that I got this chance. I mean, I've obviously overshot on time. I don't know by how much.
But even somebody actually nominated me for one of the Chameli Devi awards for this column. And
Wow.
no way it was considered.
No? Okay. I wasn't on the board if I was. But no, I was just trying to say that I'm so happy that I got this chance to celebrate your work because I love it so much. I've engaged with it for so many years. And now we're completely out of time. You'll have to pardon me, Ammu, but thanks for starting off this year on this really lovely note. I will circle back to you for other conversations, and I do want to have deeper conversations about children, journalism. How do we write about children? How do we write to children? All of that, hopefully, in another episode.
And thank you for putting me at ease, and I didn't feel the strain of the interview.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for coming, Ammu.
Thanks.
That's all we have time for in this episode of What's Your Ism. That was Ammu Joseph. And if you liked what you heard in this interview, you must go and check out those archives. Eve's Weekly, her column in The Hindu, all of these things are messages in bottles, which have kind of come to us now in this time. They're so relevant. Do check out Ammu's work. And yes, before I go, let this year be one of those in which you try and do a little extra to help journalism like ours. We depend on you, and this is not possible without your help. So one more reminder, please help independent journalism, starting with the News Minute and News Laundry.